Shalom, friends. Welcome to another Shear in Talmud. We're studying Masechet Berachot. I'm Eliyahu Shear from Chesed Ve'emet, broadcasting from the holy city of Yerushalayim. My website can be found on www.lovingkindness.co. So here we are, as we said, on learning the Gemara dealing with blessings. We're currently on Daf Yud Aleph, Amud Aleph, and we're using, that's 11a, and we're using the Koren Talmud Bavli, as you can see, this beautiful edition in front of us, where you can follow along with the English translation on the side, together with notes and pictures and whatever you need to help you understand it better. Please make use of all of the screen that you see in front of you, even though I myself am just translating it freely and giving an idea of what the Gemara is saying. Please feel free to take a look also yourself at the various notes as we move through along the way. Our discussion is centered at this point in time on a Mishnah a discussion that took place between Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel, basically, in the idea of the mitzvah of reciting the Keriat Shema. And according to the language of the Chumash itself, of what we're reading inside the written Torah, it says that we have a mitzvah to recite the Keriat Shema. We have a mitzvah to recite the Keriat Shema when we sit down, and when we lie down, and when we rise up, and along the way, we have this mitzvah to recite the Keriat Shema. And according to Beit Shammai, the idea of the words in the Mishnah are coming to teach us how we recite the Keriat Shema, that, for example, when it's the evening, we have to lie down. When it's the daytime, we stand up, or at least we sit up straight. Whereas according to Beit Hillel, he says that those words are not really coming to teach us that at all. Rather, those words are coming to teach us when we recite the Keriat Shema. What does it mean? When you lie down and when you arise, when you get up, that's to teach us that we recite the Keriat Shema at the time that we lie down, which means in the evening, and the time that we get up, that means in the morning. So therefore, how did Beit Hillel answer back to Beit Shammai with regards to the position? So he said that we learned out from the idea of uvelechdecha baderech. You do it along the way, meaning to say that you can recite your Keriat Shema in any way that you want to. If you happen to be sitting down, you recite it sitting down. If you happen to be lying down, as long as you aren't lying flat on your back or even on your stomach completely towards the ground, those are two positions that one shouldn't do Keriat Shema, but one can do it in any position and one will not lose out. And so the Gemara came with this discussion, a back and forth argument discussing the various issues involved about reciting the Keriat Shema in different positions and who is obligated and who is exempt, and so on and so forth. Please feel free to look at the previous Shear for more details. Now we're coming in at the end of the argument. And the end of the argument, the discussion says the following. Beit Shammai. How does Beit Shammai answer back to the initial question which we asked, which we said that the Chumash is teaching us that we should recite the Keriat Shema along the way? What does it therefore mean that it says we shall recite the Keriat Shema along the way? What is that coming to teach us according to the school of Beit Shammai? And Beit Shammai said that this expression, uvelechdecha baderech, when you walk along the way, comes to teach us the following. Hahu mi ba'elahu. This is, they require it in order, prat lishluchei mitzvah. It comes to exclude those people who are agents of a mitzvah. If a person is engaged in the process of being an agent in a mitzvah, he is exempt because the expression says, uvelechdecha vaderech, when you go along the way, meaning which way are you going along? You're going along the way of your ordinary day-to-day activities. So the fact that it says uvelechdecha vaderech is coming to say there's an exclusion here. And the exclusion is when you're involved in an action that you are the agent of a mitzvah, then you are exempt from reciting the Keriat Shema. And then the Gemara ends off with this whole argument and discussion. Beit Hillel omri, and Beit Hillel say, Mimeila Shema mina. This is obvious. We know that already. We can learn from this. Dafilu baderech nami kare, that even along the way, a person should also read the Keriat Shema. Let's just take a look at this note over here, which explains it in a little bit more detail. Beit Hillel also agree that one engaged in the performance of a mitzvah is exempt from reciting the Shema. If so, the halacha that they derived from when you walk along the way lacks a source and is therefore unfounded. And Beit Hillel say, derived from this halacha itself, that one who is not an agent in the performance of a mitzvah recites Shema even along the way, which means wherever a person finds himself, he can recite the Keriat Shema wherever he happens to be. Let's take a look at the note here on the side. Exclude one who is on the path to perform a mitzvah, prat l'shluchei mitzvah. The authorities differed with regards to those on a path to perform a mitzvah. Some say that they're exempt from the performance of another mitzvah only if pursuing the second mitzvah is likely to compromise fulfillment of that first mitzvah. E.g., example, if searching for a sukkah in which to sleep will take up valuable time that could have otherwise been devoted to pursuing the original mitzvah. Others say that those on the path to perform a mitzvah have the legal status of one engaged in the performance of a mitzvah and are exempt from the performance of another mitzvah, even if they could do so with no particular difficulty. So those are the basic principles that we learned here. And now we continue with the discussion of the Gemara on a new subject. Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis taught in a brisa, Beit Hillel umrim, the same school that we learned about before. It's having a discussion between Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai. There is another discussion taking place. Beit Hillel say the following: Omdim v'koirin, we stand and we read. Yoshvin v'koirin, we sit and we read. Umatin v'koirin, we recline and we read. We recline and we read. Do all these things. Holchin baderech v'koirin, we go along the way, we're walking along the way and we read. We do our work and we read. Fine. The Beit Hillel basically at this point in time are just telling us what they told us before. We can recite the Keriat Shema in any way and wherever we happen to be. There was a story, this is the story time of the Gemara, the Agarita, that it happens with regards to Rabbi Ishmael and Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. They happened to be reclining in a certain place. Which means to say they were at this point in time, let's say they were at a meal. V'haya Rabbi Ishmael mute, and Rabbi Ishmael was reclining. V'Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah zakuf. So let's get this straight. Rabbi Ishmael is reclining, and Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah was standing up straight. Let's presume that at this point in time, it is for the evening davening of the Keriat Shema, because that's what it seems to be. When the time for the Keriat Shema arrived, Hita Rabbi Elazar reclined, which means to say it's now the time of the evening, he would be reclining. Zakaf Rabbi Ishmael, and Rabbi Ishmael stood up. Now Rabbi Ishmael was reclining, but he stood up. On the other hand, Rabbi Elazar was standing up, and it seems to be that he did the right thing by going down and reclining, which would suit at least the opinion of Beit Shammai, who said that one should always recite the Keriat Shema in the particular way that he needs to recite it according to the day or the evening. In the day, he's seated. In the evening, he's reclining. Omar lo Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah le Rabbi Ishmael. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah said to Rabbi Ishmael, Achi, Ishmael my brother, Imshol lecha mashal, let me provide you with a parable to something that we can relate to. Lema hadavar domeh, what is this thing likened to? Mashal. In other words, he said, look here, I was standing and then I reclined. You, on the other hand, were reclining and you stood. Let me give you an example to explain the situation of what just happened here. Mashal, a parable. Le'echad she'omrim lo, to a person that people were saying to him, Zakancha megudal, your beard is full, very nice, it suits you, and it's a lovely beard. Omar lahem, so he said to them, Yiyeh keneged hamashkisim, which means to say, may it be against those who, as he says here, shave and destroy their beards. The only reason I grow my beard is to irritate those who cut their own. Avkach, so too over here, ata, you, calls man she'enu zakuf, all the while that she'ani zakuf, all the while that I was standing up, atamoteh, you were reclining, which sounds very nice. You were doing the right thing. Akshav kashe'ani hitaiti, but now that I reclined, in order to do things perhaps in the better way, according to Beit Shammai at least, and fulfill the requirements in the stricter way, if we call it that, atazakafta, you davka went ahead and stood up. You did exactly the opposite of me. Which means whatever I'm doing, you're doing the opposite. Omar lo, so he answered him, Rabbi Ishmael, who now stood up, says to him, Ani asisi kedivrei Beit Hillel. I did, according to the words of Beit Hillel. I fulfilled the obligation according to Beit Hillel. Meaning, even though it was the evening and I should have been reclining, in reality, I could say the Keriat Shema in a position of reclining or in a position of standing up. And I wanted to show that clearly I was fulfilling the opinion of Beit Hillel, who says you can do it in any position you want to. So I stood up. Beit Shammai, and you did in accordance with the opinion of Beit Shammai. Remember what we learned at the beginning of this Gemara. In the previous lesson, we said that a story happened that one of the rabbis, he went and he followed the opinion of Beit Shammai and he put his life at stake. He was liable for the possibility that he could have lost his life. And the rabbis came to him and said, you're liable for your life because you didn't fulfill the opinion of Beit Hillel. Now, according to the story over here, we see that Rabbi Ishmael did fulfill the opinion of Beit Hillel, which is correct. We should fulfill the opinion of Beit Hillel. And Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, he fulfilled the opinion of Beit Shammai by means of reclining, which means to say, I'm fulfilling the correct opinion. And you've chosen to fulfill an opinion who we shouldn't follow. V'lo odds. Not only that, we have an additional difficulty. Ela Shema Yiru Atalmidim. Perhaps the pupils will see what's going on here, what you're doing, and they'll come to fulfill the halacha for the generations to come, which means to say they'll see that you're reclining, and therefore they'll assume, well, if you're reclining, perhaps we should really be fulfilling the halacha in accordance with Beit Shammai. And that will be a mistake, because we should be fulfilling the mitzvah according to Beit Hillel. So when I stood up, I did the right thing by showing I follow Beit Hillel. When you reclined, you showed that we should fulfill the halacha in accordance with Beit Shammai. In the first instance, we shouldn't be doing that. In the second instance, if the Talmidim are going to see what you're doing, they're going to say, maybe that's the halacha after all. And we should fulfill the opinion according to Beit Shammai, and we should recline when we recite the Keriat Shema. My velo od, the Gemara asked the question, what does it mean that we have to have this additional teaching, velo od, and not only that, wasn't the first part of the teaching enough that we required also the second part of the teaching? We're studying Gemara. We need to know which opinion to go by and not 20 opinions to go by, which means if the Gemara is giving us 2 opinions, then in the second opinion, there is something that I need to learn in addition to what was mentioned in the first opinion. V'ki teima, if you say, Beit Hillel nami isluhu matin, isn't it true that Beit Hillel would also hold by reclining, which means to say that even Beit Hillel would agree that if you did recite your Keriat Shema in a lying down position, you did fulfill your obligation, which means to say that even if it would be that people would think this is Beit Shammai, but isn't it true that Beit Hillel himself agrees that you could recite the Keriat Shema in that way? Of course he agrees. Hanimile, these words, demate, that it says over there that you're reclining, v'asa me'ikara. That's talking about a situation where you were doing that in the first instance. Aval hacha, but here, kevan ad hashta haveis zakuf. Since until now you were standing up, v'hashta mute, and now you're reclining. Omri, people will say, Shema mina, we can hear from this, we can learn out from this. Beit Shammai, severe lahu. It's like Beit Shammai that they hold like, which means to say, it seems to be that if people will watch your behavior, that originally you were standing and then you reclined, they'll assume that that's the halacha lema'aseh. This is the practical halacha. And so they'll say you need to recline. Of course, if you were reclining at that point in time and you said Keriat Shema, nobody would assume that you were going against the teaching of Beit Hillel, because Beit Hillel said you can say it in any position you want to. But the fact that you were davka, to be standing, and you davka sat down, you davka reclined in order to fulfill the mitzvah, people will confuse it and they'll think that you're no longer fulfilling the mitzvah according to Beit Hillel, but rather you're fulfilling the mitzvah according to Beit Shammai. Shema Yeru Talmidim, maybe the pupils will see, and that's the problem. If the students see what you just did, then they will fix the halacha for the generations to come. If you'd just been reclining, nobody would have happened to have criticized you. Nobody would have said you've done something wrong. Because whatever they say, you say you're fulfilling the mitzvah, according to Beit Hillel in any case. Beit Hillel say you can say the Keriat Shema reclining, and that's what you did. But in this instance, you didn't do that. You were standing up and you davka sat down, you reclined in order to fulfill the mitzvah. And even if you want to say that you did fulfill the mitzvah, you fulfilled according to Beit Hillel, but nevertheless, anybody watching you would say that when you reclined in order to fulfill the mitzvah, you were doing so in accordance with the opinion of Beit Shammai, which comes to teach us when the Talmud is watching his Rabbi, he's going to learn how to implement the halacha. If a person is a Rabbi, he has to watch out what he's doing, because the Talmidim are watching him and they see he behaves in a certain way. So it could be that he'll think to himself, maybe that's the way to behave. Once there was a famous story that came out. The famous Rabbi Moshe Feinstein, they tell the story about him, that he was the posek, the great halachic authority in America, died in, yes, I think it was 1984 or 1986. I'm sorry, I just forgot a second. And they tell the story that he was basically the biggest posek in America at that point in time, and certainly in the world in general, he was one of the biggest poskim. It's difficult to point out who is the biggest posek. It's a ridiculous exercise, but certainly everybody knows that he was, the top 3, the top 5, whatever you want to say. All these poskim are outstanding giants in Torah. So the story goes that once it happened that there was a big debate going on in the yeshiva about whether or not when one went to the post office, one was permitted to lick the stamp in order to put the stamp on the envelope. And the question seemed to be that the problem with the idea of licking the stamp is that there was a possibility that on the back of the stamp, there is a product in it which isn't kosher. And therefore, when one licks it and one puts that product to one's tongue, there's a possibility of eating something that is non-kosher. So the story went around that some people had seen that when Rabbi Moshe Feinstein had gone to the post office, he never used to lick the stamp, but instead he used to always put the stamp onto the roller of glue. And then he would roll the stamp and then put the stamp onto the envelope. So it came out that the Talmidim in the yeshiva said, the halacha is one may not lick a stamp because we're afraid that there could be a product on that stamp that is not kosher, and a person should be careful not to put anything non-kosher into his mouth. And this whole story went around until eventually it came to the ears of Rabbi Moshe Feinstein that this is what they were doing. So they asked, is that the halacha lemaisa? He said, I don't understand. Where do you get this whole story from? They said, from you. We noticed that when you go to the post office and you prepare a stamp for putting onto the envelope, you always put it through the glue on the roller and then you stick it onto the envelope and you never lick it on the back. He says, that's just because I don't like the taste. I don't like the taste of it. So that's the reason that I don't lick it and I use the roller. The point of the story is when a person is a Rebbe, then every single thing that he is doing is being monitored by the Talmidim. And the Talmidim who see the Rebbe behave in a certain way think that that's always halacha lemaisa. Sometimes they won't even ask the Rebbe, is that the halacha lemaisa? Why did you do it? Is that the correct way? Is that the only way? They won't bother asking the question. And they'll think for generations to come that that's the halacha. So too over here, the story with regards to this opinion of Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai, that we see over here, that according to Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah and according to Rabbi Yishmael, that Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah lay down in order to fulfill the mitzvah of reciting the Keriat Shema, and Rabbi Yishmael was telling him, you could create a possible problem for the Talmidim who will see you do that. Because even though you are fulfilling the mitzvah in accordance with the opinion of Beit Hillel, and you clearly know you are not fulfilling it according to the opinion of Beit Shammai, if the Talmidim see that your behavior was davka, that one moment you were standing up, and then you davka lay down to fulfill this mitzvah, even though it was in accordance with the opinion of Beit Hillel, it could have also been understood as being the opinion of Beit Shammai, and everybody would think that the halacha is in accordance with Beit Shammai, that when a person recites Keriat Shema in the evening, he must always lie down. When he recites in the daytime, he must be upright. Beit Hillel say, no, you recite the Keriat Shema in whatever position you happen to be. Tanei, Rav Yechezkel taught the following: Asa k'divrei Beit Shammai. Asa, if one did according to the opinion of Beit Shammai, he did it. K'divrei Beit Hillel, Asa. If he did it in accordance with the opinion of Beit Hillel, he also did it. I mean, what Rabbi Yechezkel is teaching us a great principle in Halacha. Man avad kamar avad. Avad kamar avad, that the one who does in accordance with a certain opinion, he fulfills his obligation, and one who does in accordance with the other opinion fulfilled his obligation in that matter also. Which means to say, many times we found the situation in halacha where there are two divergent opinions, one completely different from the other, and yet there is no conclusion as to which opinion is really the practical followed opinion. You will find some people fulfill the opinion in accordance with one particular rabbi, and some people fulfill the opinion in accordance with the opinion of the other rabbi. And the truth of the matter is, according to the rules involved in halacha, both people fulfilled the halacha. Even though each fulfilled in accordance with another rabbi, each one did fulfill the halacha in the correct manner. And this is a very important principle in halacha, and it's the reason that we need to ask shilas, that when we find ourselves in difficult times, we don't know what to do, and we go and ask a posek, the halacha lemaisa, what should we do? We often find that the posek will give one person the opinion of one direction, and another person asks the same shaila, and he gives him the opinion of another rabbi. And the truth of the matter is that both opinions are valid, and whichever opinion you take is acceptable. But that doesn't mean to say that a person can just do what he wants to do. It means to say that he has to know that the opinion that he's accepting is most suited in accordance with the circumstances that he's involved in. He may not just accept opinions wherever he wants to. He may not go online and type in a question in halacha and see that there are 10 different answers given to the matter and just pick whatever is convenient to him. And when he has another question related to something in halacha, he goes online, he sees there are 10 different opinions, and he picks the one that he feels suits him the best. That's not what getting psak is all about. Getting psak is understanding what is the halacha which is most relevant in accordance with the person's particular life situation. That is why he needs to ask a halachic authority when he comes across an issue, and not just to pick and choose whatever he feels like it and to make his own Torah up. So Rav Yechezkel does teach us, though, that in this particular situation, one who did do in accordance with the words of Beit Shammai, he has done. And one who did in accordance with the opinion of Beit Hillel, he has also done. According to this opinion, Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai agree that one who acted in accordance with the opinion of the other fulfilled his obligation. Although the halacha was ruled in accordance with the opinion of Beit Hillel would agree that one who acted in accordance with the opinion of Beit Shammai fulfilled his obligation also, which means to say it doesn't matter which opinion we did do in this instance. In both cases, we certainly fulfilled the obligation of reciting Keriat Shema. Let us take a look at the personalities on the side over here, where we see Rav Yechezkel. Rav Yechezkel was a first-generation Babylonian Amoira. Much is not known about Rav Yechezkel, aside from certain details that were preserved primarily on account of his famous sons. He was apparently one of the Babylonian sages who learned all of his Torah in Babylonia. and was not influenced by the Torah of Eretz Israel. Therefore, he was well versed in traditions transmitted by the sages of Babylonia who preceded him. While Rabbi Yechezkel was not renowned for his Torah knowledge, he was acclaimed for his performance of mitzvot. And due to his piety, even Shmuel, one of the greatest Amoraim of his generation, respected him greatly. Rabbi Yechezkel had two famous sons. One of them was Rav Yehuda ben Yechezkel. The Rav Yehuda frequently cited, a student of Shmuel, and one of the outstanding sages of the Talmud. His other son, Rav Ami Bar Yechezkel, was one of the sharpest sages of his generation, who occasionally is cited disagreeing with his famous brother. So we see over here, whichever opinion that we went to in accordance with the opinion of Beit Hillel, Beit Shammai, that in any direction that we take it, everybody agrees that if you did do according to Beit Hillel, you fulfilled. If you do according to Beit Shammai, you fulfill also. Rav Yosef Omar. Rav Yosef said, Asa kedivrei Beit Shammai, one who did according to the opinion of the words of Beit Shammai. Rav Yosef over here we see is now arguing with Rav Yechezkel. Lo asa v'lo klum. He didn't do anything. Ditznan, as we learned in a Mishnah. Mi shehaya rosho v'rubo basuka. I'll give you a proof so that we know they can never fulfill the opinion in accordance with what Beit Shammai says. Mi shehaya rosho v'rubo basuka. Another teaching in another Mishnah says the following. If a person had a situation where his head and the majority of his body was in the sukkah, v'shulchano b'toch habayit, and his table was inside the house. So let's just imagine that for a moment. We have over here a person has built his sukkah right next to his house. And when he puts the table into the sukkah, the sukkah is very, very small. In many places in Eretz Israel, as an example, whereby the sukkah is just a tiny cubicle. It's a tiny cubicle on the side of a balcony, and one can put the sukkah there. It's just enough space for a person really to sit in the sukkah. Now, only one person can sit there. Nobody else can sit there. And then afterwards, you have, let's say, the balcony, which is directly underneath another person's balcony, and therefore it's completely useless. And you've only got enough space for one person to sit. So the person designs the sukkah with the schach on top, and he can sit over there. And he puts his table that runs across all the way into the end part of the balcony, or alternatively into the house itself. There are also many places where the sukkah area is really only enough space. The balcony is enough to put one person. But when he puts the table there, the table runs into the house. So, of course, you can't sit in the house. But he's sitting in the sukkah with this long table, and the table is extending out into the house, extending inwards into the house, and outwards ever so slightly into the sukkah. And he's seated right at this point. His body is underneath the schach, but the table is pushing inwards into the apartment. So v'ruba b'sukkah v'shuchano b'toch habayit, and he has actually that his table is inside the house. Beit Shammai poslim, Beit Shammai say asur, it is forbidden to eat like that. Or Beit Hillel makshirin, and Beit Hillel say it's kosher. What is the logic behind that? The logic behind that is Beit Shammai is saying if a person sits at a table like that, what is he inclined to do? He's inclined to move his body forwards to reach into the table, and as a result, he won't be seated underneath the schach. That's his concern. What is the state of kashrut that Beit Hillel are saying? Beit Hillel are saying, yeah, but ultimately he is sitting under the sukkah. So Beit Hillel say at the end of the day, who cares where the table is? He himself is sitting in a kosher place. Beit Shammai say no, pasul. Beit Hillel say not true, kasher. Okay, let's continue. Amru lahim Beit Hillel Beit Shammai. So Beit Hillel said to Beit Shammai, Ma'aseh, a story happened, shehalchu ziknei Beit Shammai v'ziknei Beit Hillel, that the elders of Beit Shammai and the elders of Beit Hillel, they went off levakeris Rabbi Yochanan ben HaChoranit. They went to visit Rabbi Yochanan, the son of the Choranit. Mitzvah, they found him, HaChoranit. Rabbi Yochanan ben HaChoranit is the son of HaChoranit. That's his name. Mitzvah, they found him. Shehaya rosho v'rubo basukkah. They found that his head and the majority of his body was in the sukkah. V'shulchano betoch habayit, and his table was inside the house. Exactly the opinion that we're discussing in our example. V'lo amru lo klam. And they didn't say anything to him, which means to say, if Beit Shammai were there, the Ziknei Beit Shammai were there watching the scenario, and they didn't say anything, isn't it true that Beit Shammai themselves held that it was kosher, and therefore we do fulfill the mitzvah in accordance with the opinion of Beit Shammai? Omru lahem. So Beit Shammai said to them, Umisham raya. From there you get a proof. Avhem amru lo. Even they said to him, which means to say, it seems to be that the story was misunderstood. This is not what took place, but rather they actually said to them, Im kain, if so, hayisa noheg, that's the way that you were accustomed. Lo kiyamta mitzvah sukkah miyamecha. You never fulfilled the mitzvah of sukkah in all your days. So it seems to be that Beit Shammai were very sharp, and they said that indeed you did not fulfill the mitzvah, certainly in accordance with Beit Shammai, and therefore you did not fulfill the mitzvah. We see that Beit Shammai held that anyone who did not act in accordance with their opinion did not fulfill his obligation at all. Similarly, since Beit Hillel's opinion was accepted as halacha, anyone who acts in accordance with the opinion of Beit Shammai fails to fulfill his obligation. And therefore, it's not a case of if you do like Beit Hillel, you fulfill. If you do like Beit Shammai, you don't fulfill. But according to the second opinion we learned, you must do in accordance with the opinion of Beit Hillel. And if you do in accordance with the opinion of Beit Shammai, you will not fulfill your obligation either. Let us continue. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak Omar, Rav Nachman, the son of Yitzchak, said, Asa kedivrei Beit Shammai, if a person did in accordance with the opinion of Beit Shammai, according to the words of Beit Shammai, chayev misa, he is obligated death. He's obligated with death, the death penalty. A person who fulfills the halacha in accordance with the opinion of Beit Shammai is putting his very life at stake. Therefore, he is liable for the death penalty. Titnan, as it was taught, we learned in the Mishnah. Omer Rabbi Tarfon said, Ani hayiti baba derech. And isn't this the story that we learned right at the beginning of this particular section of the Gemara? This is what we brought down when we were discussing the whole situation in the Mishnah. Right at the beginning, we said that this story came up. Rabbi Tarfon said, Ani hayiti baba derech. I was coming by along the road. And so I reclined to read the Keriat Shema in accordance with the words of Beit Shammai. And I put my life in danger on account of robbers, of highway robbers. Amru lo. And they said to him, the people who were listening to the story, they said to Rabbi Tarfon, and Rabbi Tarfon was a very great man. And nevertheless, he did not do in accordance with the teachings of Beit Hillel, instead to follow the opinions of Beit Shammai, which is not the halacha. It was worthwhile that you would have been obligated in yourself, which means to say that you deserve to be in a position where you were liable, because you have transgressed the words of Beit Hillel. And so we see over here ultimately that we should be fulfilling the mitzvah of the Keriat Shema in accordance with the opinion of Beit Hillel, who says to us that we may recite the Keriat Shema lying down, sitting up, and one is not obligated whatsoever in a way that one has to particularly lie down in the evening just because it says you have to be lying down and you have to be standing up or sitting up straight. That concludes that Mishnah. We continue now with the next Mishnah. B'shachar, in the morning, mevarek shtayim lefaneha. The next Mishnah teaches us the concept of the Berachot that we recite before saying the Keriat Shema. In the morning, we bless two blessings before the Keriat Shema, v'achas le'achareha, and we bless one blessing afterwards. Uba'erev mevarek shtayim lefaneha. In the evening, we bless two blessings before the Keriat Shema, u'shtayim le'achareha, and two blessings afterwards. Achas aruka, v'achas ketzara. One blessing which is long, and one blessing that is short. Which means to say the expression in the blessing is very quick, or it takes a long time to recite the entire blessing, all the words involved in it. Makom she'amru laharich, in a place where they said to lengthen, which means that the rabbi said, in this particular blessing, we must recite many, many words. We have to lengthen out the blessing. Eino rasha lekatzer. We don't have permission to shorten it. We don't have permission to abbreviate the words that the rabbis have said. If the rabbi said the blessing is a long blessing, then the blessing is a long blessing. We can't make up stories. Lekatzer, if the rabbi said that the formula in reciting the blessing is to be short, abbreviated, eino rasha leharich. We don't have permission to lengthen it. If the rabbis told us that this is the way it has to be, then that's the way it has to be. We can't invent our own new sidurim based upon the way we want it to be, because already the rabbis have told us the formulas of the blessings in accordance with the spiritual properties that take a role in making a spiritual reaction take place in the world. It's kind of like taking chemicals, and you have to mix the chemicals in accordance with a certain mixture. And if the great scientists tell us that we need to mix this particular chemical with that particular chemical and another and another and another to get what we need, then that's what it is. They're already masters of chemistry, and they understand what needs to be done. These rabbis are masters of spiritual chemistry, and they know that in certain examples you need to have a lengthened bracha, and in certain examples we need a shortened bracha. According to what the rabbis say, that is what takes place. We may not change the words and invent a new siddur just because we are tired or we feel exhausted because the rabbis made up a story of a lengthened bracha, or the opposite. If we feel that the bracha is short and we know better, we'd like to really expand it and make it larger, we are not entitled to do that either. Laktom, if the rabbi said it must have a conclusion, eino rashai shelo laktom, then we don't have permission that we shouldn't conclude it, which means with the bracha. If the rabbi said you need to conclude with the bracha, then that's what it is. You can't say I'm not going to conclude it. Shelo laktom, if the rabbi said don't conclude it, eino rashai laktom, then you don't have permission to conclude it. If the rabbi say don't conclude it, you don't have permission to conclude. If the rabbi say don't conclude it, then you don't have permission to not conclude. If they say don't conclude it, you don't have permission to conclude it. You can't pick and choose and do whatever you want to do. The Talmud says to us, the rabbis already told us what needs to be done, and that's the halacha. The Gemara continues. Let's just take a look at the notes. We said, I forgot to read this note here, that anybody who does not fulfill the opinion in accordance with Beit Hillel, meaning like our friend Rabbi Tarfon, who came along and he did not fulfill the opinion in accordance with Beit Hillel, but rather he fulfilled the opinion in accordance with Beit Shammai, and he put his very life at risk, because since he was lying down when he should have been seated up or standing up, he was in danger that the Rabbis could have done something to him in the position that he was resting at that point in time. Obviously, this is not to suggest that he would receive a court-imposed death penalty. Rather, it is an expression that comes to underscore the severity of this matter. This stems from the fact that establishment of the halacha in accordance with the opinion of Beit Hillel is one of the central determinations in the development of halacha. Once this determination was made after a harsh, protracted dispute, anyone who does not accept it undermines the very foundation of halachic decision making. And that's very important to understand. There are certain klalim, there's certain rules in determining what the halacha is. We need to fulfill those laws when we decide in halachic matters. We cannot just make up stories, like I said before. Simply go online, type in a question that you have, and you'll see 10 or 15 different answers, and you just pick whatever you want because you say that must be the halacha, and it suits me because that's a lenient opinion and I'm going with it. Well, that might not be the halacha necessarily. We need to know what is the procedure involved to determine ultimately what the halacha is, and we may not just pick and choose according to the way we want it to be. Beit Hillel is the opinion that we follow under almost all conditions in Paskinim halacha when it comes to all matters, because Beit Hillel are more merciful, they're more lenient, and so people can abide by these opinions of Beit Hillel. Beit Shammai was strong and stringent. So therefore the rabbis accepted that we follow the opinion according to Beit Hillel, and anybody who goes against this opinion therefore is really chayiv misa, because he is showing his lack of appreciation and valuing the direction of where the halacha must go. And 2 thereafter, we're referring to the blessings of the Keriat Shema. The Jerusalem Talmud explains that an additional blessing was instituted at night in order to render it parallel to the day. Since in Eretz Israel, the custom was not to recite the portion of the ritual fringes at night, because the mitzvah does not apply at night, the sages instituted an additional blessing to replace that portion. Now, the blessings are as follows: 1 long and 1 short. And where they say it should be long, it's long. Where they say it should be short, it's short. The question is how to understand this simple phrase, 1 long and 1 short, is the subject of a vigorous and unresolved debate between the commentaries. According to Rashi, 1 long and 1 short refers to the 2 blessings recited after the evening Shema. However, Rabbeinu Tam shows that although this is the most expedient based on the language of the Mishnah, it is difficult to accept for other reasons. Therefore, he suggested alternative possibilities. One possibility is that the phrase refers to the blessing of emet v'emunah and states a general principle. Whether a blessing is long or short, one may not alter its formula. And that was the end of the story. Let us just take a look over here at the actual halacha, the practical halacha. In the morning when reciting Shema, one recites 2 blessings beforehand. B'shachar mevarech shtayim lefaneha. 2 blessings are recited before the morning Shema and 1 thereafter. 2 blessings are recited before the evening Shema and 2 thereafter, in accordance with the ruling in our Mishnah, and that's what we've discussed. Where the sages said to recite a long blessing, makum she'amru laharich, one may not alter the formulas of blessings as formulated by the sages. For example, one may neither lengthen the formula of a short blessing nor shorten the formula of a long blessing. On this basis, some prohibit adding liturgy in the middle of these blessings, although others permit it. Similarly, one may neither begin nor conclude a blessing with Baruch if the sages did not include it in the original formula of the blessing. And see over there all these different references. The Gemara. The Gemara asks the question. The Mishnah says that we have to recite blessings before Keriat Shema and blessings after the Keriat Shema. What is it that he has to bless? What is the blessing? Omar Rabbi Yaakov, Omar Rabbi Oshaya, said Rabbi Yaakov that Rabbi Oshaya said the following. We come to Daf Yud Aleph Amud Beis. Yotzer Or Uvore Choshek. The first blessing that is recited is Yotzer Or, who forms light, Uvore Choshek, and he creates darkness. He forms light and he creates darkness. Take a look at this verse over here. According to this verse in the book of Yeshayahu, in Isaiah, it says, who forms light and creates darkness, who makes peace and creates evil. I am the Lord who does all these things. And therefore, this is the bracha that we recite before the Keriat Shema. Yotzer Or Uvore Choshek. He forms light and he creates darkness. The Gemara asks the question, Leima, maybe you should say, let him say, Yotzer Or Uvore Noiga. He forms light and he creates Noiga. Not the word Choshek, darkness, but Noiga. Noiga means a glow. Translated here is brightness. He creates brightness. Meaning what? Well, in Hebrew, we have this custom that in order to avoid speaking negative things, we often use a positive word. For example, when Hashem commanded Noah to bring the animals onto the ark, he says, bring along animals that are tahor, and then the animals that are lo tahor, not pure. Well, instead of saying lo tahor, it could have just simply said tamei, the animals that are tamei, impure. Why did the Torah add in this additional word, lo tahor, lo, it's not pure? He could have just said tamei, and he wouldn't have had to add the additional letters in. Not only would we have saved a lot of ink when we wrote the Sefer Torah, because we wouldn't have had to worry about writing all those additional 2 letters. But in addition to this, of course, the Torah is very brief. And the whole idea is that the words in the Torah should all have value. And we shouldn't be writing extra words. The Torah's way is not to put additional words unless they're absolutely necessary. Rashi tells us that the reason that we have the expression lo Torah, that they are not pure, is in order to teach us that we shouldn't speak words from our mouth that are bad. Where possible, we should rather use good words, even if it means speaking additional words. Even though we should be careful with our words, and we shouldn't have to speak words that are unnecessary. But when it comes to speaking words that are bad, to speak out of our mouths, we should rather try to find an expression that is good, even if it takes more words. That's the vort. That's what the teaching is over here. Now, also, the Torah says, for example, or we speak about it, that a person who is blind, we call him Sagi Nahor. If a person cannot see, the expression that describes him is not blind, but rather we call him Sagi Nahor, which means sufficient. He can see sufficiently, sufficient light. Sagi Nahor. There's a sufficient amount of light for him to be able to see. That is the expression that is given. In order to not cause an insult by calling the person blind, we use a softer expression, and everybody knows what it means. Now, the same thing applies over here. Yotzer or uvore choshech. He forms light and he creates darkness. Darkness is not a good thing. When we speak about God creating darkness, it doesn't sound so good. Therefore, the Gemara says, rather, let the words in the prayer say, Yotzer or uvore noiga. Then everybody will know what we're talking about. He forms light and he creates the brightness. And everybody will know what we mean. It's just a word that we're using to describe what the word really is. The word is choshech, but we use a nice word, noiga. Kediksiv, as it is written, ka'amarinan. We say, so the answer of the Gemara is, we recite it as it's written. The answer is, recite the blessing as it's written. If the words say, Yotzer or uvore choshech, why do we need to change the words altogether? Isn't that what the Prophet himself says over here? Since he says these words, let us recite the words just as he has told us to. Fine. The Gemara says, sounds like a good idea. Ela me'ata. However, now, if you say that this concept exists, that when the words are presented in the Torah in a certain way, you should always say it in that way, then shouldn't we also say, Ose shalom uvoire ra? Because isn't that what it says over here? Who makes peace and creates evil? Oise shalom uvoire ra. Mi ka'amrinan kediksiv. Do we say this as it is written? Ella, rather, no, kasiv ra. It's written as bad. Uvoire ra. God creates evil. The karinan hakol. The karenan hakol. And we read it as hakol. When we read our davening, we say oise shalom uvore is hakol. And God creates everything. The word everything is there as a substitute for the word ra, because you don't want to say the word ra. So therefore, the Gemara is asking an argumentative question here against the first teaching that we had. The teaching says that we should recite the prayer exactly as the words appear in the Nevi'im. If so, then shouldn't we also recite the words over here as they appear in the Nevi'im? Lishna Ma'aliyah. And this is a language that is superior. It's a much nicer sounding language to say, Oise Shalom Uvore es Hakol. Hachanami, so to over here, Lema, let it say Noiga. Let's say Noiga. We can say, Uyotzer or Uvore Noiga. Lishna, Lishana, Malia. It's a much nicer language that we can use, and that's going to be the best way of saying it. Ela, but rather, there is actually a reason why in the first instance we use the word choshek specifically, and in the second instance we use the word et hakol instead of uvore ra. Elo omar Rava, but rather Rava said the reason that we say yotzer or uvore choshek is kedei lahaskir midas yom balayla or midas layla bayom, is in order to mention the attribute of the day in the nighttime and the attribute of nighttime in the day. Yotzer or uvore choshek brings the darkness into the time of the daytime. And then later on in the evening, obviously, we're going to bring in the daytime within the night. The Gemara continues. Bishlama, all is well and good. Midas laila bayom, that we have the attribute of the night in the daytime. Yotzer or uvore choshech. Kedamrinan, as we say, Yotzer or uvore choshech, that he forms the light and he creates the darkness. Ela midas yom balayla, But when we speak about the attributes of day within the night, where do we find it? Meaning when we're davening in the evening prayers, where do we see that we have within it the daytime within the night? Omar Abaye said, Golel or mipnei choshech, v'choshech mipnei or. He rolls over the light in front of the darkness and the darkness in front of the light. So we see in the evening prayer, we do indeed include over here the light in connection with the evening. The idach mahi. Now, we finished that particular part of the discussion, and we learned that that is the first bracha that we recite before we say the Keriat Shema. The idach mahi. What about the second bracha? We said that we recite two blessings before the Keriat Shema. What is the second blessing that we recite? Omar Rav Yehuda, Omar Shmuel. Rav Yehuda said that Shmuel said, Ahava Rabbah. The name of this blessing is Ahava Rabbah, which means a great love. V'chein orile Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Pedas Berei, and so did Rabbi Elazar teach over to Rabbi Pedas, his son. He said to him, Ahava Rabbah. The bracha that we recite is called Ahava Rabbah. Fine. Those who do daven in the morning, and they daven this version, will know that the second blessing that precedes the Keriat Shema is indeed Ahava Rabbah. Although we have another opinion as well, as we see in a moment, which does follow the opinion in accordance with this, what we're reading here, the Hasidic Nusach Sfard includes the second opinion. Tanya Namihachi, it was also taught in another brisa, Ein Omrim Avas Eilam. We don't say Avas Eilam, although there are opinions that say we do say it, practically speaking. Ela Ahava Rabbah. But rather, the second blessing is Ahava Rabbah. V'Rabbanan Omri, but the rabbis say Avas Olam. This was another brisa, and the brisa is coming to teach us that there's another opinion with regards to the second blessing that we recite that precedes the Keriat Shema. And this blessing is Avas Olam, which means an eternal love. V'chein hu omer, and so too it says, V'Avas Olam ahavtich, with an eternal love I have loved you. Al kein meshachtich chesed, and therefore I have drawn to you loving kindness, or I have drawn you with kindness. Omer Rav Yehuda, Omer Shmuel. Rav Yehuda said that Shmuel said, and we continue this discussion. Let's just take a look at these notes so that we'll learn more about it and we conclude with that. One does not recite an eternal love, rather an abounding love. The formula for the beginning of the second blessing before Shema was not universally agreed upon in the time of the Talmud, as evidenced by this debate. Even in later eras, there was no consensus. Some Gaonim implemented a compromise between the two formulas and instituted an abounding love in the morning and an everlasting love at night. However, most Gaonim rejected this and held that one recites an everlasting love both in the morning and at night. Consequently, the custom amongst Sephardic Jews, based on the later Gaonim, the Rif and the Rambam, is to recite an everlasting love morning and night. The Vilna Gaon and Hasidic Jews adopted that custom as well. The non-Hasidic Ashkenazi custom, however, is to recite an abounding love in the morning and an everlasting love at night. Let's take a look at the notes. An abounding love, Ahava Rabbah, an eternal love, Avas Olam. We have inherited two kinds of love from our fathers, and both kinds can be considered a natural part of us, in the sense that everyone can experience them with appropriate incentive and guidance. The first of these loves is abounding love, which is indeed vast and superior in every way. It is totally superior, and in contrast to earthly love, is not dependent on any external factor. It can only be achieved through an act of meditation and introspection. Love that's sublime opens up one to a growing degree of awareness, of inner identity with divinity. It is a wholly internal experience, deeper, broader, and more sublime than any other. On the one hand, one may justifiably wonder whether the sublime love is essential for one's immediate well-being. What is wrong with simply and naturally loving God with the second type of love, eternal love, like a son loves his father? Why can one not simply confess the soul's dependence on and yearning for God and leave the intellectual quest to fathom his greatness to those better qualified? After all, simple natural love is within the capacity of all men, whereas the intellectual inquiry and meditative comprehension of the divine requires an elevated level of connection, attained by only a few. On the other hand, if a son becomes conscious of his father's greatness and learns to appreciate his virtues and capabilities, that will enrich his love and provide it with breath and vitality that may otherwise be lacking. The simple love that transcends its irrational, natural, and personal confines and becomes something that greatly enhances one's capacity to live in the world of God, Father to us all. It is as though one were to say, even if God were not my own King and Father, I could not help loving him in every way. The relationship gains an added dimension. So here we see that there are these two different types of love and the arguments for and against why one would want to say the one over the other. Now we'll start this next section. We have 2 minutes to go. So let us just read these things. Omar Rav Yehuda Omar Shmuel. Rav Yehuda said that Shmuel said, Hishkim lishnot. If a person woke up early in the morning to study Torah, which is what he should be doing. We finish now the section of the Keriat Shema, and we go to, or in other words, at this point in time, the Berachot and so on. We come to a new section. A person awoke early in the morning, and he wants to study some Torah. Ad shelo kara Keriat Shema, so long as he has not yet read the Keriat Shema, tzarich levarech, he must make a blessing. That means to say, there's a special blessing that a person recites every morning on studying Torah. It is said that why was the Beit Hamikdash destroyed? Because the Jewish people did not recite the blessing on studying Torah. Well, of course, in those days, they surely must have recited the blessing. What does it mean? What does this teaching come to say to us? It comes to tell us that they didn't take seriously enough the value of their Torah study, that when they said the blessing, they valued the Torah study for something completely unique to what Torah really is. They regarded Torah study as something, as a natural part of life, as if it's just part of the natural way of living. But it's not. Torah study is something which is a blessing. It is something which is a gift from God. And in order to appreciate this gift, when we get up in the morning, we recite a blessing to show our appreciation on the Torah that we're about to study. We get enjoyment from the blessing itself as we value what it means to study the Torah. When we eat a fruit, we make a blessing on the fruit because we're enjoying the fruit. When we study Torah, so too, we recite a blessing on the Torah to show that we love the Torah that we're going to study. So a person woke up early in the morning. The Halacha says, Ad shelo kara Keriat Shema, tzarich levarech. Until you did not yet recite the Keriat Shema, you need to make the blessing on studying Torah. Mishe kara Keriat Shema, once you've already read the Keriat Shema, eino tzarich levarech, you no longer need to make the bracha. Why? Shekava nifta ba'ava rabba. Because already a person fulfilled his obligation when he said the Ahava Rabbah. Go and read the Ahava prayer in English, and you'll notice that Ahava Rabbah is all about the love that we have towards God, towards Torah study, towards the aspect of Torah we're about to study. Which means if a person would immediately after davening begin his Torah studies, he could theoretically fulfill his obligation of reciting the blessing of the Torah that he has to do by saying the blessing of the Keriat Shema. Omar Rav Huna said, LeMikra, for studying Mikra, tzarich levarech, he needs to make a blessing. Mikra is the Chumash, the 5 books of Moses. If a person's going to study the 5 books of Moses, he needs to make the blessing. Ule Midrash, eino tzarich levarech. And for the Midrash, if he's going to learn Midrash, he doesn't need to make a bracha. You only need to make a bracha if you're going to study Mikra, not Midrash, according to Rav Huna. Rabbi Elazar Omar, Rabbi Elazar said, Le Mikra ule Midrash, for both Mikra and Midrash, tzarich levarech, you need to make a blessing. If you're going to study Mikra or you're going to study the Midrash is the homiletical part of the Torah, the story parts of the Torah, fills in the gaps of what's really going on. In the Chumash, you also need to make a bracha. Le Mishnah, eino tzarich levarech. According to Rabbi Elazar, If you're studying Mishnah, you don't need to make a blessing on the Torah. Rabbi Yochanan Omar, and Rabbi Yochanan said, Af leMishnah, even for Mishnah, Nami tzarich levarech, you also have to make a bracha. Aval leTalmud enu tzarich levarech. But for Talmud study, there you don't need to make a blessing. So these are all the different opinions as to when we have to make a bracha for learning Torah and when we don't. We have not by any means exhausted what we're learning about here, and certainly we have not come to a conclusion of any kind. This should not be learnt out as halacha lemaisa. Let's just read this last one over here. V'Rava Omar, and Rava said, Af leTalmud tzarich, even for Talmud, a person needs levarech, to bless. Now you'll notice that there are two different brackets. There's a rounded brackets and the square brackets. The custom is to read what's in the square brackets, and the rounded bracket is considered to be an error, perhaps a printing error or something like that. And very often it makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. So we skip the rounded brackets and we read the square brackets. And over here we see that even for Talmud, one needs to recite the brocha of the Torah, which means to say every morning when we wake up, as part of our wake-up routine, as we thank Hashem for all the different things that we go through in life. Thank you for allowing me to stand and to stretch my limbs and to walk on the ground. And thank you for not making me this type of person and that type of person. Whatever it is, the different blessings that we recite, we must also recite a blessing on studying Torah so that we will learn to appreciate and love the words of the Torah that we learn. It is something unique. It is not just a secular study that we open up the book and we learn it quickly and we get a job and we make money off it, but rather there is a love for the Torah. We express that love by the blessing that we recite on the Torah every single day. And so therefore actually it doesn't matter what part of Torah we're going to learn, we need to recite that bracha every single morning for whatever it is that we're going to learn. Thank you very much for joining me. I'm Eliyahu Shear from Chesed Ve'emet, broadcasting from the holy city of Yerushalayim. My site is www.lovingkindness.co. If you've enjoyed this shiur or even got something out of this shiur, please like the video, share the video with your friends and family, make a positive comment or a question which we can discuss on the YouTube if you wish, or alternatively send me an email via my website and I'd be happy to discuss the issue in more detail. Please click on the bell button to be notified of future shiurim. For those interested, please consider becoming a partner in the activities that we're involved in Chesed Ve'emet. We need your support. Everything that we do here, these videos and everything, we don't get paid for, and we'd like to bring out more. We'd like to do more videos of more Torah and offer even more to people who want to learn, people perhaps who can't afford to learn and just want to learn various sections of Torah. We need your support to allow us to be able to continue in this direction. So please come on board, see what we're doing, be in touch with me. I'm happy to discuss anything with regards to Torah, with life, what we're doing, and what we still want to accomplish in everything that we do. We'd be delighted to be in touch with you, so do be in touch with us. Looking forward to another shiur in the near future. Please join us, be in touch with me. You're welcome to join us for these shiurim. They're free, and you can take part and ask questions afterwards, and I'd be delighted to discuss any more things with you. Wishing you all the best. See you soon. Shalom, shalom. Bye-bye.